Life in the Soviet Union was a complex and multifaceted experience, shaped by the ideological underpinnings of communism, the centralized control of the state, and the vast diversity of the population across the expansive Soviet territory. From the October Revolution in 1917 until the dissolution of the USSR in 1991, the Soviet state exerted profound influence over every aspect of life, from the economy and politics to culture, social relations, and individual freedoms. The lived experience of Soviet citizens varied widely depending on factors such as geography, class, ethnicity, and historical period, but certain overarching themes characterized Soviet life across different eras. The early years of the Soviet Union were marked by revolutionary zeal and dramatic social and economic changes. The Bolshevik government, led by Vladimir Lenin, sought to create a classless society based on Marxist principles, which necessitated the abolition of private property and the nationalization of industry and agriculture. These radical transformations were accompanied by widespread social upheaval, as the new regime dismantled the old order and sought to impose its vision of a socialist utopia. The early Soviet period was also a time of immense hardship for many citizens. The Russian Civil War, which followed the October Revolution, devastated the country, leading to widespread famine, disease, and loss of life. The Soviet government's attempts to collectivize agriculture and industrialize the economy at a rapid pace further exacerbated the suffering of the population. The forced collectivization of farms led to widespread resistance, particularly among the peasantry, and resulted in the deaths of millions from famine and repression, most notably in Ukraine during the Holodomor of the early 1930s. Despite these challenges, the Soviet government sought to instill a sense of purpose and optimism in the population through propaganda, education, and a promotion of socialist values. The state-controlled media portrayed the USSR as a beacon of progress and equality, contrasting the supposed evils of capitalist societies with the achievements of socialism. The Soviet education system emphasized the importance of collective over individual achievement and sought to inculcate a sense of loyalty to the state and its ideology. Youth organizations like the Young Pioneers and the Komsomol played a key role in shaping the attitudes and beliefs of Soviet children and adolescents, promoting values such as discipline, hard work, and devotion to the communist cause. Under Joseph Stalin, who came to power after Lenin's death in 1924, the Soviet Union underwent a period of intense political repression, economic transformation, and cultural change. Stalin's rule was characterized by the centralization of power, the purging of perceived enemies, and the implementation of the five-year plans, which aimed to rapidly industrialize the Soviet economy and increase agricultural production. The human cost of these policies was enormous, as millions of people were arrested, executed, or sent to labor camps during the Great Purge of the late 1930s. The forced labor of millions in the Gulag system, which was used for everything from mining to infrastructure projects, became a defining feature of life under Stalin. Cultural life in the Soviet Union was also tightly controlled by the state. The arts were expected to serve the purposes of the state, and a style known as socialist realism became the official artistic doctrine. This style glorified the achievements of the Soviet state and depicted an idealized vision of life under socialism. Writers, artists, musicians, and filmmakers were often subjected to censorship and were expected to produce works that conformed to the state's ideological goals. Those who deviated from the official line risked persecution, and many intellectuals and artists were silenced or forced into exile. Despite the repressive nature of the Soviet state, there were aspects of Soviet life that many citizens found fulfilling. The Soviet government provided free healthcare, education, and housing to all citizens, and it promoted the idea that everyone should have access to basic necessities regardless of their social status. This commitment to social welfare was a source of pride for many Soviets, and it stood in contrast to the inequalities they associated with capitalist societies. Additionally, the Soviet Union made significant strides in areas such as science, technology, and sports, which contributed to a sense of national pride and achievement. The launch of Sputnik in 1957, for example, was celebrated as a triumph of Soviet ingenuity and a symbol of the country's technological prowess. The Soviet Union's victory in World War II, known as the Great Patriotic War in the USSR, also became a central element of Soviet identity. The war had a profound impact on the Soviet population, as millions of lives were lost and many cities and towns were destroyed. However, the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany was a source of immense pride and became a key part of the Soviet narrative. The post-war period saw the USSR emerge as a global superpower, with its influence extending across Eastern Europe and beyond. The post-Stalin era, beginning with Nikita Khrushchev's leadership in the mid-1950s, brought some changes to Soviet life. Khrushchev's policy of de-Stalinization involved the denouncement of Stalin's excesses and a partial relaxation of political repression. The thaw, as this period is known, saw a brief flowering of cultural and intellectual life, as well as some improvements in living standards. However, the Soviet system remained fundamentally authoritarian, and the state continued to exert significant control over many aspects of life. The Brezhnev era, which lasted from the mid-1960s to the early 1980s, was characterized by a return to more conservative policies and a focus on stability and continuity. While living standards improved for many Soviet citizens during this period, with greater access to consumer goods and improved housing, the period was also marked by stagnation and a lack of political reform. The Soviet economy, heavily centralized and focused on heavy industry and defense, struggled to keep pace with the more dynamic economies of the West. Corruption and inefficiency became increasingly widespread, and the quality of goods and services often suffered as a result. Despite the challenges of life in the Soviet Union, many citizens developed strategies for coping with the system and finding meaning in their lives. Informal networks of family, friends, and colleagues played a crucial role in helping people navigate the challenges of everyday life, whether it was finding a scarce commodity or securing a better job. The black market also flourished, providing access to goods that were otherwise unavailable. Religion, though officially discouraged and sometimes repressed, remained an important source of comfort and community for many Soviets, particularly in rural areas. The final years of the Soviet Union were marked by increasing economic difficulties, political unrest, and a growing sense of disillusionment with the system. Mikhail Gorbachev's attempts to reform the Soviet system through policies such as glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, ultimately failed to address the underlying problems facing the country. The loosening of state control led to greater political and social freedoms, but it also unleashed forces that contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. The dissolution of the USSR brought an end to a system that had shaped the lives of millions of people for over 7 decades. In conclusion, life in the Soviet Union was a complex and multifaceted experience that varied widely depending on one's social position, geographic location, and the historical period in question. While the Soviet state provided certain benefits, such as access to education, healthcare, and housing, it also imposed significant restrictions on individual freedoms and subjected millions to political repression. The experience of living in the Soviet Union was shaped by a combination of ideological commitment, state control, economic challenges, and personal resilience, and it left a lasting legacy that continues to be debated and studied to this day.